Right now, I'm challenging myself to see if I can make 128 Regulation H teams that are each different from one another over the course of 128 days. Why 128, you might ask? At the end of the 128 days, we're going to do something special where we battle every team against each other in a single elimination bracket to see which team emerges on top. There will be some competitively strong teams, there will be some gimmick teams, and there will be some probably a good number of goofs and gaffs in there, so if you want to follow through to the end, subscribe so that you can keep up with each day. But without further ado, let's move on to day 74. Alright everybody, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be going over a Revavroom team. Now Revavroom doesn't really have much to stand out, I'm being honest. Like, it does have a signature move, and it is a Shift Gear Pokemon, and Shift Gear is a really exclusive move that they don't give to a lot of Pokemon, but we're not going to be running Shift Gear on Revavroom today, despite the fact that Revavroom is a physical attacker that would value both the speed boost and the attack boost from the Shift Gear. But this Revavroom team is actually based in Trick Room and trying to deal as much damage as we can inside the Trick Room, and then hoping that we can just, like, take a hit and then KO some mons whenever the Trick Room is over. So starting off with Revavroom here, we're going to be running two of our stab moves and Poison Jab, and as I mentioned before, we have the signature move Spin Out, which is a 100 base power steel type move, but at the cost of lowering our speed by 2 every time we use it, which is kind of weird that the car's signature move makes it go slower, but nonetheless that's what we're working with. So whenever we are about to set up Trick Room, we can go for Spin Out, and then we're faster than like some of the mid-speed mons, not all the mid-speed mons, but some of the mid-speed mons with our Revavroom set. If we swap over to the EVs here for just a sec, and we are exactly a speed IV that makes it so that whenever our speed is cut in half by the Spin Out, we will be slower slash faster than Pokemon like even Ursaluna inside of the Trick Room. But if we're not going inside Trick Room, Revavroom is still decently fast, and because we don't have anything invested in speed, we can afford to invest that back into our HP to at least take like one hit. But on Revavroom as well, we have the high horsepower, mostly just for type coverage into opposing steel types slash Archaludon whenever we've chipped the Archaludon down enough. And Parting Shot is also nice because we can use it at the beginning of our Trick Room turn in order to decrease the damage that Dusclops takes if there are Pokemon that are slower than Dusclops on the field. But also once we spin out and then set up Trick Room with Dusclops, we also get a really fast Parting Shot to bring in perhaps a better Trick Room Pokemon. And one of the nice things about Revavroom is that it is Overcoat, which means that we can ignore the effects of powder moves, the most notable one being Sleep Powder and Spore. And sometimes, like, Filter is a good ability, don't get me wrong, and Revavroom is one of the very few Pokemon to get Filter as an ability. It's just kind of difficult to side proc the Filter on Revavroom since it's only got 2 weaknesses, and one of them is a quad weakness, so if you try to proc that one, you're probably still going to do like 30% to yourself. And then Fire as a spread move only has like Lava Plume, and I think there's another one, but that one's not available in this game for some reason. But Lava Plume has a 30% chance to burn, so if we were using Special Attack Revavroom, we would be kind of okay, but since we're using Physical Revavroom, it's not great to be using Side Lava Plume here. Or Terra Flying to dodge that ground type weakness that we have a quad weakness to that I mentioned before, and we are Clear Amulet so that we are not getting our stat dropped by Intimidate, but also any other type of stat drop in the game. Next up, to support Revavroom, we have the Berserker, and we used Berserker before for a very offense-based team, and now we're using it for a much slower reason, since Berserker itself is pretty slow. But the main reason that you run Berserker is because of its Steely Spirit ability, which means that all Steel-type moves that Berserker and its allies use will be multiplied by 1.5 times, which is a very big boost. And this Berserker is a little bit more support-orientated, as we have the Fake Out for maybe getting 1 flinch chance, or just to like, proc a Focus Sash, or just like a priority move that we bring Berserker in for later on in the game, as well as the Helping Hand in order to increase the damage of the Pokemon that's next to Berserker, as well as just that good stab Iron Head, and we're Terra Steel to even further boost the power of the Iron Head, since hopefully we're setting up Trick Room with Berserker on, and then Berserker doesn't really have to worry about a defensive Terra, and even if there is a hit that's going to take out Berserker, we can just rely on its Focus Sash in order to at least take 1 hit. Next up we have Dusclops, and Dusclops is going to be our ideal Trick Room setter here because it is a very tanky Pokemon since it's not fully evolved. We get to use the Eviolite item, and its ability doesn't really come into play as both Pressure and Frisk are both not great.
But the very big thing about Dusclops is that it has some good moves for whenever we're inside the Trick Room, the most notable one probably being Pain Split, because once Dusclops takes 2 attacks and then gets up the Trick Room, we can Pain Split the opponent to make it so that Dusclops goes back to full HP, and the opposing Pokemon gets their HP halved pretty much. And then once that's happened, we can either choose to Pain Split the other Pokemon on the side of the field, or we can go for a Nightshade to maybe try and take them out, or we can decrease our own HP with Curse that will cause the opponent to take a quarter of their HP every turn. If they try to just protect out the Trick Room, then we're going to be doing damage to them over time. As well as we have the Dark Terra on Dusclops, which is the most ideal Terra for Dusclops, and I never really end up using it in the games more often. I really should be using it more often than I do, but Dark Terra is nice because it means that you don't get Prankster taunted, but it also means that you're resistant to your 2 previous weaknesses. Up next, we got Araquanid to help us beat the fire and ground types that threaten Revavroom and Berserker pretty notably, and Araquanid is just an overall good Trick Room Pokemon. And this Araquanid is going to be running the Liquidation and the Leech Life to hit the opponent, but we're mostly going to be using Liquidation in order to hit because of our Water Bubble ability, which will double the power of our Water-type moves, and also means that we can't be burned, and we take half damage from Fire, which is nice for dealing with Trick Room Torkoals, as well as we're Terra Water to even further boost the power of our Water-type moves, but also to get rid of our neutrality to Fire and just quad resist Fire. As well as we also have the safety goggles on Araquanid so that we are not falling prey to any powder moves. And on this Araquanid, I decided to put on Entrainment since it's kind of nice to make our Steel-type Pokemon neutral to Fire-type moves because we can put Water Bubble onto them, but we can also put Water Bubble onto the opponent if they're very reliant on their abilities, but we can also just put it onto Quagsire in case we want to increase our water type damage with Quagsire. And there's also the added benefit that if we put Entrainment onto Corviknight, one of the main ways to beat Corviknight is just to burn it, and then Corviknight doesn't get burned anymore. Fifth on the list we have Quagsire, and I decided to slot on Quagsire mostly for the unaware, but also the fact that it is a slow Pokemon. It's also ground type, even though we're not using any ground type moves on the Quagsire. I wanted a Pokemon that could better support the Dusclops perhaps if we just need a turn to stall with Dusclops. We can go for something like the Yawn in order to put the opponent asleep, and then we can Yawn spam them until they either switch or decide to attack with a Pokemon, forcing that Pokemon to go asleep. And we do have the Waterfall just as our water type stab damage, and that can be boosted by the Entrainment onto the Quagsire, getting rid of our unaware, but getting Water Bubble in case we need to do some more damage. And we do have the Recover on Quagsire, however, it's not super useful to have Recover on Quagsire, so I'm not quite sure what I would put there instead. Perhaps maybe Curse in order to make ourselves slower and physically tankier, but then we have the Citrus Berry in order to give us back a little bit of health, and we're Terra Grass so that we can dodge our weakness to Grass, but also we're not getting put to sleep by powder moves. And last but not least, I just decided to select Corviknight on this team just because it's a very dependable Pokemon, but it also benefits from all the other Pokemon on this team because it has Steel-type moves for getting boosted by Berserker, but Araquanid can do that Entrainment thing that we talked about before, but also the Corviknight doesn't really depend on its speed, so it can function both inside and outside of Trick Room. And on this Corviknight set, we have the Iron Head, but we also have the Body Press, so we can build up some bulk ups hopefully, and then get off some Roost in order to stall the opponent for a bit while the Quagsire is maybe putting them to sleep, or Dusclops is pain splitting them. And then once our attack boost or our defense boost have built up enough, we can just start taking out the opponents. And we've talked about Corviknight before, but just in case you need a little brush up on Mirror Armor makes it so that we reflect all the stat drops that are thrown at Corviknight. So things like Intimidate get reflected back, or special defense drops from things like Earth Power get reflected back. So it's pretty handy to just let Corviknight sit on the field for a while. As well as we have the leftovers, a little bit more staying power over time, and we're Terra fighting just because I wanted to boost the power of the Body Press, but they're probably a better Terra for Corviknight. It's just Terra fighting kind of fit a little bit better on this one set, I thought. But yeah, that's the basic gist of the team. Let's get into some battles. Alright, so what we're looking at here is a pretty interesting spread of Mons where they have 4 Dragon types, but also Mimikyu and Grimmsnarl seem to be their supports. So I'm not really sure what direction this team is going, except for maybe like Flygon Earthquake spam, since Altaria and Hydreigon are immune to the Earthquake. The opponent leads Grimmsnarl and Altaria, and this is pretty nice for Revavroom because they're not exerting any immediate pressure into it, and we get Dusclops in here. And I decided to Terra Dark Dusclops just because it was possible Grimmsnarl could have gone for the Prankster Taunt. And we get the Spin Out while they set up their Tailwind with Altaria, so we get to drop speed and set up Trick Room this turn, which is super nice as the opponent swaps in Hydrapple here, Super Sweet Syruping, but the Super Sweet Syrup only affects Dusclops, and they go Terra Fire on their Hydreigon, perhaps to dodge the steel type move, or at least resist it, and the heat wave, but they actually missed Revavroom, which I'm not sure how much damage that would have done to Revavroom since it is a spread attack, but just based on the damage that it did to Dusclops, I don't think it would have KO'd Revavroom, but we just get to Nightshade and then Poison Jab into Hydrapple here, as Hydrapple goes for the Draco Meteor into Revavroom, but it doesn't do too much damage, and Hydreigon goes for the Earthquake, revealing that it's not like a Specs Hydreigon or anything like that. But we Nightshade in order to take out the Hydreigon there, and we Leech Life the Hydrapple in order to take it out of the game, and the opponent sees that they can't really win with just an Altaria in the back. Here we have what looks to be a setup team where they use like Magmar in order to follow me away the damage for something like maybe Tauros or Sneasler in order to get in some attacks, but also Cloyster could end up shell smashing. So we start Corviknight and Dusclops here as the opponent starts Cloyster and Magmar, and I really didn't want to see Magmar at the start, but they immediately just decide to Terra Dragon their Cloyster and then get off the Shell Smash there and their White Herbs, so they lose their item. And Corviknight dodges the Will-O-Wisp, but that doesn't really end up mattering here as we get our defense boost on Corviknight, and we put a curse onto Cloyster in order to make it so that it either has to leave the field or it'll just get chipped away over time. And now they land the Will-O-Wisp on Corviknight as we get some more defense boost, and they do crit Corviknight on the Rock Blast here, which is a tiny bit unfortunate, but Corviknight still has a decent amount of health. So we Pain Split the Magmar to start getting damage into that, but also so that maybe we can curse it next turn. And they Flamethrower and they crit Corviknight, which is super unfortunate, and they also crit an Icicle Spear here. So, yeah, not super great for Dusclops, but at least now Dusclops is super low, so we can bring in the Araquanid here, and I decide to bring in Revavroom, seeing as they might have had, like, Ice Shard in order to hit the Dusclops there, but thankfully we just catch a Terra Blast onto Revavroom, and that doesn't do very much damage at all. But with the Rillaboom, they get to click a Fake Out into one of our Mons, but I decide to use Revavroom in order to KO the Cloyster on the last turn Trick Room, as both Mons were into Cloyster that turn. They reveal they have Goldango in the back. Goldango's air balloon, so unfortunately we cannot high horsepower into it. Araquanid dodges the Grassy Glide there as we just try to Poison Jab into Rillaboom, and luckily we do end up getting a Poison, which is kind of our saving throw here. After all those crits that we had, we're going to suck Dusclops here to the Grassy Glide, and Revavroom's super slow, and it's not going to take the Shadow Ball from the Goldango here, but now we can bring back in Araquanid, who can go for the Protect for one time, and even though Grassy Terrain is up, the Poison will do more damage than the Grassy Terrain heals, so that's going to be the end of Rillaboom, and Goldango still has a special attack boost, but Araquanid is a pretty specially tanky Pokemon, so we just get to use our Terra Water and click the Liquidation into Goldango. So I think in that last game, what I should have done is once I had the Bulk Ups up, I should have Terra'd Corviknight in order to not be weak to the Fire type move, but we were still getting crit a little bit too much on Corviknight there, so it's just kind of unfortunate Corviknight's start, but the Terra on Corviknight, like, we didn't really need to save the Terra for Araquanid here at the end, but it definitely helped us out that we did. Here we have like a pretty standard rain comp with Pelipper, Caledon, and Basket Legion. I wonder how many times I've said that over all these videos so far. But they also have the Sneasler for exerting their Fake Out pressure, and Incineroar for exerting their Fake Out pressure, and the Amoonguss for just being a nuisance. So the game starts out and they lead Pelipper and Arcaladon as we lead Revavroom and Dusclops here, which I think I'm pretty fine with in the moment, as Pelipper decides to Tailwind and they Electro Shot with Arcaladon, but Dusclops tanks it pretty good, only doing about 50%. We get Spin Out into Pelipper, which will break its sash, but it'll also make it slower under Trick Room. Not that we weren't already slower than all of these Pokemon, but we Pain Split the Arcaladon in order to get Dusclops' health back up. We tried Poison Jabbing Pelipper in order to maybe take it out there, but doesn't get taken out. The Electro Shot does do more damage into Dusclops this time, but it means that we can Pain Split the Arcaladon again, and we high horsepower the Arcaladon in order to take it out of the game. As Pelipper goes for the Weather Ball, but Revavroom takes it thanks to our HP investment, and Basket Legion just decides to Aqua Jet into the Revavroom in order to take it out there, as the Dusclops ends up just taking a Hurricane, and now we have one turn left of Trick Room, and they decide to swap their Basket Legion out for Pelipper, as we just Pain Split, or out for Sneasler, but we just Liquidationed into that slot, and it's going to KO pretty much whatever's in that slot with the Water Bubble and the Rain, and they decide to Last Respects Dusclops, and it was definitely a bit of a misplay here for me to not just Terra Dark Dusclops here in order to get up another Trick Room. Yeah, my bad. But I thought that since they were going to probably double into the Dusknoir slot, that a Rockwanid would be free to get off an attack. But a Rockwanid is going to be the one left on the field here. We do have Berserker at least in the back who can fake out into Pelipper as they try to Last Respects into Berserker, but Berserker gets brought down to its sash. And Liquidation does good damage into the Basket Legion, and I can't attack both slots, so we just Terra Steel Berserker since we saw how much damage the Water Bubble did into the Basket Legion, so we can just Terra Steel Berserker to make sure that we take out the Basket Legion. We have what looks to be an Alolan Ninetales Snow team with the Baxcalibur for getting Baxcalibur set up. However, Steel types probably mitigate them wanting to bring the Baxcalibur a lot, so they can just do like Indeedee, Sneasler, Unburden things is what it's going to look like. So we start Revavroom and Berserker here as they start Indeedee and Goldango instead of the Sneasler. I was really looking forward to seeing the Sneasler here because Revavroom checks Sneasler pretty good as they can't Dire Claw us and we're neutral to the close combat. But the game starts and they follow me and they nasty plot with the Goldango, and I high horsepower thinking that they might try to not redirect with Indeedee on this turn or maybe swap to another Pokemon. But because of that, Indeedee gets to live, so I think the play there was definitely going for the spin out and doing a lot of damage into Indeedee. And then maybe, based on how much damage the high horsepower did, the spin out would have actually been able to KO Indeedee, and then we could have gotten some Iron Head chip onto the Goldango. But they decide to hard swap into Talonflame here, as the Goldango just goes for the Protect, but we see how much damage the resisted spin out does to the Talonflame, and try Iron Head Goldango as Goldango goes Terra Water on the next turn for whatever reason. Berserker just protects here, as I probably predicted that Revavroom was going to have to take a hit this turn. We preserve the Focus Sash on Berserker here. In this turn, we get to Terra Dark Dusclops as Flare Blitz comes out in Berserker, not even doing enough to bring it down to the Sash, but we take the Shadow Ball because of the Terra, and we get some Iron Head chip onto Goldango, and Dusclops is able to set up the Trick Room, and they swap Talonflame for Sneasler here and just protect Goldango, which is a good play because I doubled into the Goldango slot just fine. But now they swap in Indeedee here to bring back the Psychic Surge, and they're not affected by the Nightshade, but they are affected by the Iron Head, so we get to take Indeedee there. In close combat, unfortunately, it's just going to be able to take out Dusclops, but now Sneasler has a defense drop, and as we saw, it was definitely Psychic Seed, so it's not Focus Sash. And Goldango just protects this turn, but we Liquidationed into Sneasler in order to get rid of it. And Iron Head would have done some damage into Goldango, but Goldango's not as much of a threat because it doesn't have the nasty plot anymore. So this turn, I decided to hit Goldango and then get rid of Talonflame, and they decided to set up their nasty plot. So it's all riding on whether or not a Rockwanid can take this next attack, and because we resist the spread move with a Rockwanid, and a Rockwanid's pretty special bulky, we can get that Liquidation into Goldango in order to take it out. Here we have what looks to be a double weather team, as they can lead both Torkoal and Hisuian Typhlosion to exert immediate eruption pressure, but they can also do the Pelipper and the Archaludon, and they might also be able to side proc their Archaludon with the Population Bomb because of stamina. And Malamar's, I mean, it's just kind of here. But I lead Dusclops and Quagsire as I figure that's my best lead into both weather modes, and they actually don't really start with the weather mode, they just decide to start with the Mouse Hold, which tells me that they're probably taunt on Mouse Hold, and they do end up taunting Dusclops, which is a little annoying, but we at least get to yawn into the mouse, and I tried to Nightshade maybe just to proc the Pelipper's Focus Sash if it had one, but they hard swap our Caledon here and they side Population Bomb, but we don't really care about this right now because Dusclops is a ghost type, so it can't be hit by the Body Press, and Quagsire is unaware, so this side hitting doesn't really benefit us, but it does mean that the mouse is going to fall asleep at the end of the turn, which will make it easier to deal with once these Population Bombs stop covering up my entire gosh darn screen. And I don't think there was a single crit in those Population Bombs is what it looks like, so we got a little unlucky there, maybe needing a little extra damage on the Archaludon down the line. But we Nightshade into Archaludon and deal some damage into it at least, and they decide to hard swap Malamar there now that the mouse is asleep. They body press Quagsire, but the opponent gets to find out what Unaware does as we continue to just chip the opponent with our moves, and Dusclops' taunt ends there, but they Electroshot into Dusclops, and Dusclops takes about half from it. But I should really tear Dusclops here since Malamar is a dark type, and I knew it was probably going to use a dark type move, but I didn't think it was going to be knockoff. I thought it was going to be Night Slash, if anything. which I wasn't really sure how much damage Dusclops would take, but it would definitely benefit us to have up the Trick Room here, and then maybe start pain splitting the opponent. So this is definitely a misplay on my part, not just going for the Terra Dark. But Quagsire gets to Waterfall again, and that brings the Malamar down pretty low. And now we're kind of stuck in a weird spot since we can't get up the Trick Room, and yeah, we bait the Electro Shot there on a Rock Grenade as the Malamar reveals that it has Rest, but we continue to Waterfall chip. The Archaludon looks like that did about 15% in the rain, so we need to hit the Archaludon again in some way in order to damage it, because we don't care it's about its defense boost right now, and they bring back the rain with Pelipper, thankfully enough. Revavroom is just going to have to take a sec here from the Electro Shot as we yawn into the Archaludon to make it so that it can't take out a Rock Grenade in 2 turns, because we can just protect a Rock Grenade right now. And they tried body pressing into Quagsire, but Quagsire gets up its Citrus Berry, and we also recover here. So the Archaludon is going to fall asleep, and we Terra Water Araquanid, and Hurricane comes out into it, but unfortunately it confuses Araquanid, and Araquanid hurts itself in confusion right away, which means that we don't get to get rid of Archaludon, and Weather Ball comes out into Quagsire and does big damage into it because we're neutral to it, but I just tried to Liquidation into Pelipper to see maybe if that would take out Pelipper as we just Waterfall away the Archaludon, and Maushold at least is asleep, and I protected Quagsire hoping that they would maybe attack Quagsire, but they do Hurricane the Araquanid, which brings it lower, but at least this time we get to Liquidation down Pelipper, so both opposing Pokemon are guaranteed. Actually, no, the Maushold's not guaranteed to take a turn of sleep yet. It's already taken 1 turn of sleep. But the Malamar so far hasn't taken a turn of sleep, and as long as we can get rid of the Maushold on this turn by clicking the Liquidation into it, and then just using the Recover spam with Quagsire, since Quagsire doesn't have an item anymore, so Knockoff isn't going to do very much damage to it. Even if the Quagsire goes for Superpower into Quagsire, then we can, we'll be unaware to its stat changes on the Malamar with it using its Contrary to build up stat boost. But the mouse does stay asleep, thankfully, but Araquanid just decides to KO itself to its confusion, so that confusion from Pelipper really won them the game there, and yeah, I tried waterfalling into the mouse here, and the mouse wakes up, and it just gets to go for the Population Bomb into Quagsire, and lands all of its hits into Quagsire, and takes it out of the game.
So ultimately, this match did come down to an unfortunate double confusion hit off of a Hurricane. However, I definitely could have played better by just using the Dusclops to be Terra Dark and getting up our Trick Room, and then that would enable a Araquanid a lot better. And lastly, we have a game here against a Grafaiai Slaking team, but they also have a Hisuian Zoroark to be a little bit cheeky with, but the Blood Moon Ursaluna does threaten us quite a bit because it can click Ground-type moves into all our Steel types and has Blood Boon. Well, the game starts out, and the opponent immediately leads Grafaiai and Slaking, which is what we like to see since we have Revavroom and Berserker, and they swap Amoonguss immediately, and Terra goes their Slaking, and I wanted to fake out Slaking since it's possible. It could have gone for Stomping Tantrum, since that's a pretty common move to have on Slaking, because your True One ability, at least if like you don't get to change your ability, you can use the double damage Stomping Tantrum because of your ability. But they go for Terra Ghost, and they go for Hammer Arm into Revavroom, which Revavroom takes pretty okay, but they're a Jetpack, so they get to swap out of their Pokemon, and Grafaiai is Sash, so it takes the spin out pretty good here, but Grafaiai is not the threat, so I just decided to Helping Hand into Revavroom here to try and deal damage to Amoonguss, since Amoonguss can't put Revavroom to sleep because of our Overcoat, but the Grafaiai doodles the Overcoat from Revavroom here, so the Slaking is able to obtain it, but the spin out doesn't do enough damage to KO it, unfortunately. They do Double Edge into Rillaboom, or Revavroom, not Rillaboom, even though those names are actually very similar. I never realized. Revavroom and Rillaboom. Kind of a side tangent, but if Revavroom went down there, I was perfectly fine because the Berserker is Focus Sash, and I used Berserker to attack into the Slaking, so we would have at least taken down that slot, but they decided to swap in their Amoonguss, who was actually Hisuian Zoroark that time, so the Hisuian Zoroark got absolutely clapped by Berserker's Iron Head there, and Revavroom's spin out fails because the Slaking KO'd itself due to its Double Edge, but if we had Iron Headed into the Slaking and then spun out into the Hisuian Zoroark, it would have only done more damage. But the opponent decides to forfeit, seeing that they only have an Amoonguss who probably can't touch either of these Pokemon because it only has like Pollen Puff or Sludge Bomb and can't Sludge Bomb into Steel types. So yeah, that was the Revavroom Trick Room team, and honestly, I think this strategy is pretty fun. As I mentioned before, Revavroom, I was trying to use it as like a shift gear attacker, but it doesn't really function that way, because there's not really a great side attacking move for Revavroom. Maybe in like a future generation, there will be a better move for it in order to get side attacked with its filter and then activate the weakness policy with Revavroom. Also, Revavroom is like my 7th Pokemon team. Like, whenever I was playing through Scarlet and Violet, I very much wanted to use Revavroom, but it was just a Pokemon that got slotted out on the team for like the very last second. But I think this set is something that I'll try to keep in mind whenever I'm maybe using Revavroom in the future. It's kind of fun to have a Pokemon that's faster and then gets slower whenever the Trick Room is set up because of its signature move that still does like some pretty good damage because it's like 100 base power. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, maybe consider leaving a like on the video and even consider subscribing because both of those things will help me out an absolute ton. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you.